Welcome back to Zarila HOA Stories. Drop your city or country name in comment. Chapter 1. Welcome to Hillside Acres ****. Lila Morgan stood at the entrance of her new home, her hands resting on the edge of the wooden railing. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over Hillside Acres. She had chosen this neighborhood for its quiet charm, the manicured lawns, and the promise of peace. After years of undercover work with the FBI, she and her family needed this, a fresh start. "Mom, can we go to the pool now?" Jessie's voice cut through her thoughts, eager and upbeat. Lila turned to her daughter, her gaze softening. Jessie was always so full of life. At 15, she had a knack for making everything seem brighter. "Just give me a few more minutes," Lila said, smiling. "We'll head over soon." Jessie sighed, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "You said that half an hour ago. I'm going to miss the fun." Lila chuckled, ruffling her daughter's hair. "You're in a hurry to swim, huh? All right, we'll go. But you need to remember, this is a fresh start for both of us. No more running around and hiding from danger. Just enjoy." Jessie grinned. "You're always so serious, Mom. Lighten up." Lila shook her head, laughing. It was nice to hear Jessie's laughter without the tension of their past hanging over them. They'd left behind a lot of things in the city: danger, secrets, and the constant feeling of being watched. In this quiet neighborhood, Lila hoped for a normal life. As they walked towards the community pool, Lila noticed the neighborhood was even more pristine than she had expected. Rows of identical houses lined the streets, each lawn perfectly trimmed, the hedges shaped like neat little rectangles. It felt like a suburban dream, or was it a prison with white picket fences? "Mom, this place is amazing," Jessie said, pulling at Lila's hand. "Look at the pool. It's huge." Lila smiled but felt a flicker of unease. Something about the neighborhood seemed too controlled. The people walking past them all greeted each other politely, but there was an underlying tension in their smiles. As though they were all following unspoken rules they had no choice but to obey. They arrived at the pool, and Lila found a quiet corner to sit while Jessie dove right in, her laughter filling the air. An older man in a suit approached Lila. He had a sharp, almost unsettling smile. He was tall, with perfectly combed hair and a strong handshake. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "I'm Harold Winters. I run the HOA here at Hillside Acres. Welcome to the community." Lila stood, offering a polite smile. "Thank you. It's nice to meet you. I'm Lila Morgan. This is my daughter, Jessie." Harold's eyes scanned the pool briefly, then returned to Lila, his gaze a little too intense. "It's a pleasure to have you both here. We pride ourselves on maintaining the community's standards." He paused. "It's a close-knit place, and we like to keep it that way." Lila nodded, though she didn't feel entirely comfortable. "I'm sure it's a great neighborhood." Harold's smile never wavered. "We have strict rules around here. The HOA is here to ensure everyone adheres to them. You'll find that everyone respects the guidelines." Lila's instincts flared. "Of course," she said. She wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into what kind of rules he was talking about, but something told her it wasn't the time. Harold's presence was commanding, almost overwhelming. He stepped back, his smile widening. "I'll leave you to get settled in. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out." "Thank you," Lila replied, watching him walk away. Her instincts were kicking into overdrive. The way Harold had said strict rules, the way he observed everything around him, it was too precise, too controlled. Lila had seen people like him before. People who hid behind authority, using power to control others. Was it all just about keeping things orderly, or was there something more? She glanced at Jessie, who was swimming with a few of the neighborhood kids. Jessie had already made friends, but Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the perfect facade of this place. As Lila settled back into her chair, Harold's words echoed in her mind. "We like to keep it that way." That evening, after dinner, Lila and Jessie explored the neighborhood more, walking down the tree-lined street. The houses were all the same, well-kept, uniform. As they passed by a few of the homes, Lila couldn't help but notice how many windows had closed blinds. The curtains were drawn tight, as though the people inside didn't want to be seen. Was it privacy or something else? "Mom, can we go back to the pool tomorrow?" Jessie asked, snapping Lila out of her thoughts. Lila smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. "Maybe. We'll see." Just then, a woman across the street waved at them. She looked friendly enough, though Lila noticed the stiffness in her posture. "Welcome to the neighborhood," the woman called out, but her eyes darted nervously towards the house next door, as if checking if anyone was watching. Lila gave a polite wave back, but the unease in her gut deepened. There was something off about the way people acted here, like they were all playing a part, pretending to be something they weren't. That night, as Lila lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that Hillside Acres wasn't the peaceful escape they'd hoped for. It was too perfect, too controlled. And then, she heard it. A knock on the door. Jessie had fallen asleep, but Lila's heart pounded as she quietly got up, peering through the peephole. A man stood outside, holding a clipboard. His face was obscured by a shadow, but there was something familiar about his silhouette. Lila's instincts screamed at her to open the door, but she hesitated. Who was this person? She stepped back from the door, slowly retreating to the window to see if she could spot him again. He was gone. The uneasy feeling in her chest flared. She'd moved here for peace, but now, more than ever, she felt like she was being watched. Chapter 2. Behind Closed Doors. Lila woke up the next morning with a gnawing feeling she couldn't shake. She had spent half the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of Hillside Acres. The strange knock on her door had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The man's figure had lingered in her mind, his shadow barely visible through the peephole. "Mom, can we get breakfast? I'm starving." Jessie's voice cut through the quiet of their new home, pulling Lila from her thoughts. Lila rubbed her temples, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in her chest. "Yeah, give me a minute," she called back. As she got up to prepare breakfast, the house felt quieter than usual. The walls, once comforting, now felt like they were closing in on her. She had always trusted her instincts, and they were telling her that something was off with Hillside Acres. She glanced out the kitchen window at the perfectly manicured lawn, the sun casting long shadows over the neighborhood. The peaceful facade was starting to feel suffocating. Everyone here seemed so polished, so compliant. "Everything okay, Mom?" Jessie's voice broke through her thoughts again. She was standing at the table, waiting expectantly. Lila forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking about the neighborhood. It's quiet." "Too quiet?" Jessie asked, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe," Lila muttered, pushing the unease aside. "But we'll be fine. Let's eat." As they ate breakfast, Lila's mind wandered back to the knock at the door. She had tried to tell herself it was nothing, just some kind of mistake or a delivery person. But it hadn't felt like that. The man had known exactly where to go, and he'd disappeared too quickly. It was as if he'd never been there at all. After breakfast, Lila decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. She needed to clear her head. Maybe the fresh air would help her shake the feeling of being watched. "Where are you going?" Jessie called as Lila grabbed her jacket. "Just around the block. I'll be back in a bit." The crisp morning air hit Lila's face as she stepped outside. The sun was high, casting shadows on the perfectly clean sidewalk. As she walked, she tried to keep her mind focused on the beauty of the neighborhood, on the fresh start they had been looking for. But the feeling of unease only grew stronger the further she walked. She passed by a row of houses, all identical, all immaculate. And then, something caught her eye, a house that looked different from the others. The lawn was overgrown, the mailbox was crooked, and the paint on the front door was chipped. It was as if the house had been abandoned, left behind by the rest of the community. Lila slowed her pace, staring at the house. It didn't fit. It didn't belong here. She turned to walk past it, but then she noticed something even stranger. The curtains were drawn, but there was a figure in the window, watching her. For a split second, Lila locked eyes with the figure. Then, just as quickly, the figure disappeared, as if they had been waiting for her to look. Her heart raced, and her breath caught in her throat. Lila tried to shake it off, but the feeling that she was being watched returned in full force. She quickened her pace, walking past the house and back towards her own. As she neared her home, she saw Harold Winters, the HOA president, walking up the street toward her. His calm, calculating expression remained unchanged. He nodded at her as he passed by, his eyes lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "Morning, Lila," Harold said, his voice smooth and controlled. "How's everything settling in?" Lila forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Good, thanks." Harold's gaze sharpened, and he gave a slight nod. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. The HOA is here to keep everything in order." Lila raised an eyebrow. "Order," she repeated, her voice tight. Harold's smile remained. "Yes, we keep everything in line. It's what makes Hillside Acres such a great place to live." He turned and continued walking, his footsteps echoing in the quiet street. Lila watched him go, a sense of dread creeping up her spine. "We keep everything in line." His words lingered in her mind. That afternoon, she decided to go back to the community pool with Jessie. Maybe being around people would help calm her nerve. But when they arrived, the pool area was empty. No one was there, not even the lifeguard. The place was silent, the water perfectly still. Jessie shrugged. "Where is everybody?" "I don't know," Lila said, her voice tinged with confusion. "Maybe they're just not here today." They sat by the pool for a while, but the silence was almost oppressive. Lila glanced around, scanning the empty area, and caught a glimpse of a figure moving behind the fence near the back gate. Her instincts flared. Someone was watching her again. "Mom, I'm going in," Jessie said, clearly not bothered by the emptiness of the pool area. Lila nodded absently, her eyes still trained on the spot where she had seen the movement. But when Jessie dove into the water, the figure was gone. She told herself it was just her imagination, but a chill ran down her spine. As the afternoon wore on, Lila tried to push the thoughts out of her head. She couldn't let paranoia control her. They had moved here for a reason: peace, safety, normalcy. But the more she tried to settle in, the more she realized something wasn't right about Hillside Acres. That night, after dinner, Lila found herself sitting in front of the window, staring out at the neighborhood. She could see the lights flickering on in the houses across the street, one by one. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but she knew something was off. There was a darkness here, hidden beneath the perfect lawns and white fences. A knock at the door broke her concentration. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She froze for a moment, her mind racing. Was it him again? The man from last night? Or someone else? She stood up slowly and walked to the door, glancing through the peephole. This time, it was Harold. But there was something different in his demeanor. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was serious, almost cold. Lila opened the door. "Harold," she said, her voice tight. "What is it?" Harold's eyes locked with hers. "I just wanted to check in, make sure you and your daughter are adjusting well," he said, his voice low. "And to remind you, the HOA's rules are strict. We don't tolerate rule breakers. Not even one mistake. Not in Hillside Acres." Lila's pulse quickened. "Is that a threat?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Harold didn't respond right away. Instead, he gave her a long, calculating look. "Just a reminder," he said softly. "We like to keep things in order here. For everyone's benefit." As Harold turned and walked away, Lila's stomach twisted. What had he meant by that? What was he really threatening? Chapter 3: Unmasking the Man Behind the Rules. The next morning, Lila woke up early, unable to shake the unease that had settled deep within her. She hadn't slept much, her mind constantly replaying Harold's words. We like to keep things in order here. For everyone's benefit. His voice echoed in her ears, as if reminding her of something she couldn't yet understand. As Jessie got ready for school, Lila stood by the kitchen counter, absently stirring her coffee. Her mind kept drifting back to the strange events of the past few days, the knock on the door, the figure behind the fence, and Harold's unsettling warning. What was his real game? Lila needed answers. "Mom, I'm heading out." Jessie's voice cut through her thoughts. She was dressed in her school uniform, her bag slung over her shoulder. "I'll see you later." Lila nodded, distracted. "Be careful, all right?" Jessie flashed her a quick smile. "Always." Once Jessie was gone, Lila grabbed her phone and began making calls. She needed information, something to break through the fog that surrounded Harold and the HOA. She called the local police station, her voice calm but firm. "Hi, I'm a resident of Hillside Acres," she said. "I've noticed some odd things happening around here, and I was hoping to get some information." The officer on the other end was polite, but his response was dismissive. "Hillside Acres? It's a quiet neighborhood. Nothing unusual happens there. Maybe it's just your imagination." Lila's frustration bubbled up. "It's not my imagination. People are acting strange. I've even seen empty houses with no one living in them. And the HOA's control. It feels wrong." The officer sighed, clearly uninterested. "Ma'am, there's no need to overthink things. If you're worried, maybe talk to your HOA president. They handle things like this." Lila's grip tightened on the phone. Talk to Harold? She knew that wasn't going to give her the answers she was looking for. "Thanks," she said shortly, hanging up. She was on her own. Determined to dig deeper, Lila decided to visit some of the neighbors she'd met briefly. She had a feeling there was more to this place than anyone was letting on. With a deep breath, she headed out the door, her mind racing with questions. Her first stop was Ellen Parker's house, a quiet woman in her late 40s who had waved at Lila when they first moved in. She seemed friendly, though there was always something about her that felt off, her eyes constantly scanning the neighborhood, her words always careful. Lila knocked on the door, and after a moment, Ellen answered. She looked surprised but quickly recovered, offering a tight smile. "Lila, what can I do for you?" Ellen asked, stepping aside to let her in. Lila hesitated, then walked in, her eyes scanning the tidy living room. It looked normal, too normal. But the tension in the air was palpable, something Lila couldn't ignore. "I've been meaning to ask," Lila started. "How long have you lived here, Ellen? It seems like such a quiet place, but sometimes I feel like people are too perfect, you know?" Ellen's smile faltered, and she quickly sat down, patting the spot next to her. "I've lived here almost 10 years now. It's a lovely place. Really, it is. But, well, I can't say it's always been this way." Lila leaned forward, sensing a crack in the surface. "What do you mean? You've seen things?" Ellen glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice. "I shouldn't say anything, Lila. But there's been talk. People move out suddenly. And not just because they want to. Some of them, well, let's just say it's because they didn't follow the rules. The HOA is very strict, and people who don't obey, they get pushed out." Lila's heart raced. "What kind of rules? What are you talking about?" Ellen looked like she might backtrack, but then she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know everything, but I do know this. Harold Winters runs the HOA with an iron fist. He's not just about landscaping or keeping the neighborhood clean. He's involved in other things, dangerous things. People who question him or don't fall in line, well, they disappear. They either leave voluntarily or they just stop showing up. It's happened before." Lila sat back, stunned. "Disappear? You mean like, gone?" Ellen nodded, her face pale. "Not just gone. The kind of gone that makes you wonder if they were ever here in the first place. And no one talks about it. Ever." Lila's mind was spinning. She had come for answers, and now she had more questions. Why doesn't anyone do anything about it? Ellen's eyes flickered with fear. Because Harold controls everything. Everyone here depends on the HOA for everything. The community fund, the neighborhood events, even who gets to sell their house. You think someone's going to speak out against him? No. They'll lose everything. The weight of Ellen's words hit Lila like a punch to the gut. Harold wasn't just some overbearing HOA president. He was a manipulative, dangerous figure who held everyone in his grip. And Lila was now part of his world. Before she could say more, Ellen stood abruptly, wiping her hands on her pants. I shouldn't have said anything. You should go now, Lila. It's not safe to talk about these things. People are watching. Lila stood up quickly. Ellen, wait. What are you afraid of? Ellen didn't answer. She just ushered Lila out the door, glancing nervously over her shoulder as she did. Lila walked back to her car, her thoughts racing. Ellen's words echoed in her mind. People disappear. The unsettling feeling in her gut had only grown stronger. Harold Winters wasn't just running an HOA, he was running a dictatorship. And Lila had just scratched the surface. She needed more answers. She couldn't back down now. As Lila drove back to her house, she decided to make her next move. She had to get closer to the truth. But she wasn't prepared for what she would uncover next. Chapter 4: The Warning. Lila couldn't shake the unease that followed her all day. The face in the window, the warnings from Ellen, everything pointed to something bigger than just a controlling HOA. Something darker. As much as she tried to push it out of her mind, she couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that Harold Winters wasn't just a man running a neighborhood. He was orchestrating something far more dangerous. That night, after Jessie went to bed, Lila sat in the living room, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. Her phone was on the table in front of her, a list of names she had gathered, neighbors, old residents, and even the local police. She was starting to feel like a detective, trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. The house across the street, the one with the blinds always shut, kept pulling her attention. Lila couldn't help but wonder if that house was more than just abandoned. Was it a safe house for someone? Was it another place for people Harold had pushed out to hide? The questions spun in her mind, making her dizzy. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I know what you're doing. Stop digging or there will be consequences. You're being watched. Lila's blood ran cold. She stared at the message for a long moment, her heart racing. It was clear that whoever sent it was watching her. And worse, they knew exactly what she was after. Her mind raced. Could it be Harold? Or someone connected to him? Whoever it was, they were sending a clear message. The last thing Lila wanted was to escalate things, but now she couldn't stop. There was too much at stake. Just then, a knock on the door. Lila jumped, startled. She hadn't expected anyone. She stood up quickly, her breath catching in her throat. Who could it be at this hour? She crept to the peephole and saw Harold standing there, his expression unreadable. He was alone, dressed in his usual sharp suit. He didn't seem surprised, as if he'd known she would answer. Lila opened the door cautiously, her mind still processing the message she'd just received. Harold, she said, her voice calm but strained. Harold didn't smile. He looked past her, his gaze lingering on the inside of the house before returning to Lila. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said smoothly, his voice low and controlled. Lila felt a chill. No, it's fine. What can I do for you? Harold took a step forward, his presence filling the doorway. I just wanted to check in, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. I've noticed you've been asking around, talking to people. Lila's pulse quickened. She didn't like where this was going. I'm just getting to know my neighbors, Harold. It's a small community. I thought I'd say hello to everyone. Harold's eyes darkened. You're not fooling anyone, he said quietly. I know what you're trying to do. Lila's stomach tightened. She forced herself to stay calm. And what exactly am I trying to do? Harold took another step closer, his voice cold. You're poking around where you shouldn't. People like you, who question the system, they don't last long here. You have a family, don't you? A daughter? I suggest you think carefully about your next move. Lila's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. But Harold wasn't done. I know how these things work, he continued, his tone icy. You dig too deep and you'll lose everything. Your home. Your family. The life you thought you could have here. Lila's hands clenched into fists at her sides, the weight of his words pressing on her chest. Is that a threat? She asked, her voice steady despite the rising fear inside her. Harold smiled then, a cold, calculating smile that didn't reach his eyes. Call it whatever you like. But this is a small community, Lila. We take care of our own. People who don't follow the rules, they're removed. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes not. Lila felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. He was playing a game, and she was caught in the middle. But she couldn't back down now. Not after everything she'd learned. Not after hearing the fear in Ellen's voice. I don't scare easily, Lila said, her voice sharp. You can't intimidate me. Harold didn't flinch. Maybe not. But you should be scared for your daughter. For yourself. People like you don't last long around here. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like a shadow. Lila stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing. What was she supposed to do now? Harold had just warned her, threatened her family, and she didn't know who to trust anymore. Was it just a game to him? Or was he serious? She closed the door slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. As the sound of his footsteps faded away, she felt a cold emptiness settle in her stomach. Something had changed. The stakes were higher now. Harold had made it personal. Lila couldn't ignore the warning, not now. But she couldn't back down either. She had to know the truth. What was Harold hiding? And what was really going on in Hillside Acres? She walked to the window, pulling the blinds back just slightly to peer outside. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Lila's eyes landed on the house across the street, the one with the drawn curtains. This time, there was no movement. But something felt off. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. Someone was watching her. Chapter 5. The Break-In. Lila sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. She had spent the entire morning trying to make sense of the mess she had found. The more she looked into Harold Winters and the HOA's dealings, the darker it became. The list of residents who had mysteriously disappeared, the strange property transfers, the whispers of shady land deals, everything pointed to something much bigger than just a neighborhood watchman with too much power. She could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but every time she typed, the letters seemed to blur into meaningless words. She knew she couldn't back down now. But the fear gnawing at her insides was real. A sudden sound broke her focus. The front door creaked open. She wasn't expecting anyone. Mom! Jessie's voice echoed from the hallway. I'm home early. Lila quickly closed her laptop, pushing the uneasy feeling aside. Hey kiddo. How was school? Boring as usual, Jessie said, walking into the kitchen. Her voice sounded lighter than usual, but the moment she saw her mother's tense face, her expression changed. You okay? Lila forced a smile. Just tired. Nothing to worry about. Jessie raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. Can we go to the pool later? I need to get out of the house. Lila hesitated. She wanted to say yes, but her gut told her to stay home, to be alert, to keep watching. How about we stay in today? Maybe just relax for a bit. Jessie groaned but accepted the decision. Fine, whatever. I'm going to my room. Lila watched her daughter disappear down the hallway, her heart heavy with the secrets she was keeping. She couldn't tell Jessie what was really going on. The danger wasn't just real, it was closing in, fast. Lila's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from an unknown number. You're digging into things you don't understand. It's too late to turn back now. You're being watched. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure if the message was from Harold or someone else, but the threat was clear. Too late to turn back. Before Lila could process the words, there was another sound, something from the back of the house. A soft thud. She froze, her heart pounding. It was too quiet for a house full of people, and too late for anyone to be outside. Slowly, she got up, moving cautiously through the hallway towards the back door. Her hand brushed against the cold doorknob. Everything seemed normal, but something felt off, like the air was holding its breath. Just as she reached for the door, she heard a louder noise. A sharp scrape against the window. Lila's instincts kicked in. She backed away from the door, moving silently into the living room. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the room, looking for any sign of movement. Another sound. It was coming from the back window now, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass cracking. Lila's heart thudded in her chest. Someone was trying to break in. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling as she dialed the police. The line rang, each second stretching into eternity. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice came through the speaker. There's someone trying to break into my house, Lila said, her voice low but steady. I need help. Now. Stay calm, ma'am. Can you describe the situation? I don't know who it is. I'm alone and the back window's been smashed. Please send someone. Help is on the way. Stay on the line. Lila moved quickly to the kitchen counter, grabbing a knife for protection, her senses on high alert. She moved silently, waiting, her breath shallow. Every sound made her jump, each creak in the house, each whisper of wind outside. Then, a noise. The back door handle rattled. Lila's blood ran cold. She quickly moved into the hallway and crouched down, hiding behind the corner, holding her breath. The door creaked open. The intruder was inside. She gripped the knife tighter, her knuckles white. She could hear soft footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. Who's there? Lila called out, her voice steady but laced with fear. I'll call the police again. There was a brief silence. Then, a voice, familiar but cold. Lila, it's Harold. Lila's breath caught in her throat. Harold. The last person she expected. Harold, she said, trying to mask the surprise in her voice. What the hell are you doing in my house? Harold stepped into view, his eyes dark and unblinking. You've been asking too many questions, Lila. I gave you a warning. Now you need to understand that there are consequences. Lila's mind raced. What was he doing here? Was this just intimidation, or was something more sinister unfolding? You think you can intimidate me? Lila said, stepping out from behind the corner, the knife still clutched tightly in her hand. You think I'll just stop because you threaten me? Harold smirked, unbothered by the knife. You're not the first person to challenge me. But you're the first to dig so deep. That's a problem. Then why come here? Lila asked, her voice sharp. Why break into my home? I didn't break in, Harold said, his voice too calm. I just came to remind you that you're in my territory now. You keep pushing, and you'll lose everything. Lila's eyes narrowed. You're not going to scare me. I'll bring everything to light. Harold took a step closer, his eyes scanning the knife in her hand. You can try. But people who cross me, Lila, they don't come out the other side unscathed. You've seen what happens when people don't follow the rules. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just about the HOA. It wasn't just about property laws or rules. Harold was playing a much darker game. What are you really after, Harold? Lila demanded. Why go to such extremes? Harold stepped back, his cold smile returning. Because I can. And because people like you are a threat to the peace I've built here. Lila's hands shook, but she didn't lower the knife. This ends now. He chuckled. You think so? You're too late. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the back of the house, followed by voices shouting in the distance. Lila's mind snapped back to the present. The police. Harold looked over his shoulder, his face hardening. This isn't over, Lila. Not by a long shot. Before Lila could react, he turned and rushed toward the back door, disappearing into the night. Lila was left standing in the dark silence of her living room, her heart still racing. Chapter 6. The Silent Death. The morning after Harold's break-in, Lila felt like she hadn't slept at all. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions, and fears. Harold had come to her house, threatened her, and disappeared without a trace. The police had arrived too late to catch him, but they'd assured her they'd be watching the area closely. Still, the feeling that someone was always lurking in the background wouldn't leave her. Her hands shook as she poured herself another cup of coffee. The house was eerily quiet without Jessie's usual chatter. Jessie had stayed with a friend overnight, and Lila was thankful for the break. She needed time to think, to figure out her next move. But as much as she wanted answers, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that she was already in too deep. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lila froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. Harold? No, it couldn't be. She slowly walked toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She peered through the peephole. It was George Richardson, the retired journalist who had warned her about Harold's hold on the neighborhood. She quickly opened the door. "George, what are you doing here?" George stepped inside quickly, glancing over his shoulder before he closed the door behind him. He looked more frazzled than she had ever seen him, his clothes disheveled and his eyes wide with fear. "I need to talk to you," George said, his voice shaking. "It's about Harold. We're running out of time." Lila's stomach twisted. "What's going on, George?" He glanced around the room, as though he expected someone to be watching. "You were right about Harold. It's worse than I thought. I've been digging deeper into his past, and I found something that could ruin him, and it's not just about the HOA. Lila's heart raced. "What is it? What did you find?" George sat down at the kitchen table, his hands trembling. "I traced some of the properties Harold's been involved with. They weren't just for sale. They were part of a larger operation, one that goes back years. People have been buying and selling land, laundering money through these transactions." Lila sat down across from him, her voice low. "Money laundering? You're saying Harold's been involved in criminal activity?" George nodded, his face grim. "It's bigger than I ever imagined. But that's not the worst part." Lila leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" "The worst part is that Harold isn't just working with criminals," George said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He's connected to people much more dangerous than I thought. The land deals are a cover for something far more sinister, human trafficking, Lila. People are being smuggled in and out of this area." Lila's world tilted on its axis. "Human trafficking? Here, in Hillside Acres?" "Yes," George whispered, his eyes filled with regret. "And it's been happening for years. People come in, they disappear, and no one says a word. It's all part of Harold's plan to keep everyone quiet. And it's working." Lila felt like the ground beneath her had been pulled out. She'd suspected that something was wrong, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. How had she missed it? How had she been so blind? "How do you know all this?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. George's eyes flickered. I've been following the money trail. It wasn't easy. But I couldn't get any further. I had a source, someone who knew everything, but I don't know what happened to them. They vanished. Just like that." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, vanished?" George shook his head, his voice trembling. "I can't find them, Lila. I tried calling, checking their usual places. No one has seen them in days. I think Harold found out what I was doing." Lila stood up quickly, pacing back and forth. "This is insane. If Harold's behind all this, we need to expose him, now. Before anyone else gets hurt." George stood, grabbing her arm. "Lila, listen to me. We can't just expose him. Not yet. Harold is dangerous. If we go after him now, he'll make sure we disappear too. You don't understand. He has connections everywhere." Lila jerked her arm away, anger flooding her veins. So, what are we supposed to do? Just sit back and let him get away with it? No, George said, his voice rising. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need a plan. A way to gather more evidence, something solid. Then, and only then, can we go public. But we have to be smart. We have to play by Harold's rules, at least for now. Lila's mind raced. Every instinct told her to confront Harold, to expose him for what he truly was. But George was right, she couldn't act recklessly. Harold had already shown that he had the power to ruin lives. I'm not going to let him get away with this, Lila said, her voice steady but filled with determination. I'll do whatever it takes. George looked at her, his eyes full of fear and concern. I hope you're ready for what's coming. Because Harold will stop at nothing to protect his empire. As Lila turned to grab her phone, there was a sudden knock at the door. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be now? Before she could move, the door was kicked open. 2 figures rushed in, masked and armed, their eyes cold and unfeeling. Lila's blood froze in her veins. Don't make a sound, one of the men said, his voice low and threatening. George lunged toward the door, but the second man shoved him back, sending him crashing into the wall. Lila's mind raced. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling, but before she could make a call, the first man grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. We've been watching you, Lila. You should have stopped before you dug too deep. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as the 2 masked men dragged her down the hallway, their grip tight and unyielding. She tried to shake them off, but their strength was overwhelming. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to escape. She had no idea how much time had passed since they broke in, but it felt like hours. The men hadn't said much since the initial threat, just quiet orders, keeping her moving forward. She tried to make out their faces beneath the masks, but the low lighting only made their features more shadowed. They reached the front door, and Lila's heart skipped a beat as she saw the black SUV parked outside. The driver's seat was empty. Where had the other person gone? Get in, one of the men said gruffly, pushing her toward the car. He had a gun in his hand, and he didn't hesitate to use it if she made one wrong move. Lila's pulse raced as she reluctantly climbed into the back seat of the SUV. The doors slammed shut behind her, and she felt the car lurch forward, pulling her into the unknown. The man sitting next to her kept his eyes trained on her, his finger twitching near the trigger. The tension in the car was thick, and the silence made her skin crawl. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she knew that would only make things worse. Where was George? What had they done to him? She turned to look out the window, trying to get a sense of where they were taking her, but the streets all blurred together in the darkness. Her mind spun with thoughts of Harold. Had he orchestrated this? Or was someone else pulling the strings? The man next to her suddenly spoke. You shouldn't have gone digging. Now you've caused a lot of problems for yourself. Lila's heart sank as his words hit her. What do you want from me? The man's smile was cruel. We don't want anything from you, Lila. You've seen too much. Now we just need to make sure you stop asking questions. Lila's chest tightened. She wasn't afraid of death, not anymore. But her daughter, Jessie, she was the one thing that still made her fear for her life. Is this really necessary? Lila asked, keeping her voice calm. Harold's not going to like what you're doing. If you think he's going to let you kill me, you're wrong. The man's expression hardened. You're delusional if you think Harold cares about you. Lila's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Harold must care, he's the one pulling the strings. The man leaned in closer, cutting her off. You think Harold cares about anything other than power? You're a pawn, Lila. Just like everyone else who's ever tried to take him down. Lila's breath caught in her throat. What was he saying? Harold's not a fool. He's been watching you every step of the way. He knew you would dig, knew you would try to expose him. And when you did, he sent us. Lila stared at him in shock. You're lying. The man's laugh was cold and empty. Am I? Think about it. You've been investigating him for weeks. And what has Harold done? He's let you get this far because he's not worried. He's been using you all along, Lila. And you've been too blind to see it. Lila's mind raced. Harold, he knew? She had trusted him. She had trusted that everything she was uncovering would be the key to stopping him. But if he had known all along, what had she really been doing? Had he been letting her dig because he wanted her to? No. No, that couldn't be right. Harold couldn't be part of this. Where are you taking me? Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't let her emotions show, not now. The man beside her grinned. You'll find out soon enough. The car slowed as they approached a large, gated property. Lila's pulse quickened and she pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. Where were they taking her? What was behind that gate? The SUV came to a stop, and the man opened the door, yanking Lila out of the car before she had a chance to react. He pushed her toward the gate, and Lila's feet stumbled beneath her as she tried to keep up. The air felt thick and the silence was suffocating. The gate creaked open and Lila was shoved inside. The man stayed close behind her, his grip tight on her arm. She had no idea what she was walking into, but one thing was certain. This was the beginning of something much worse. The sound of voices reached her ears as they passed through the courtyard. Lila glanced up, her heart racing. There were several people gathered near the building, all standing still, their eyes fixed on her. One of the men, who appeared to be in charge, stepped forward. She's here. What now? The man who had been holding Lila's arm spoke. We take care of her. Just like we've been ordered. Lila's mind raced as she struggled to process everything. Who were these people? What did they want with her? And why had Harold let this happen? A sharp pain shot through her chest and she gasped. For a moment, everything went dark, the ground beneath her feet feeling unsteady. Lila, a familiar voice called. Lila's eyes snapped open, and she saw George Richardson standing at the far end of the courtyard. His face was pale, his clothes torn, but he was alive. George! Lila croaked, disbelief flooding her. He nodded, his eyes wide with panic. They've been watching me too. Lila, you need to get out of here, now. They're not just going to let you walk out. Before she could respond, the man in charge took a step forward, his eyes narrowing at George. You should have stayed out of this. Now you've sealed your fate, just like her. Lila's heart hammered in her chest. This was no longer just about her. It was about survival, and she wasn't sure how much longer they could all hold on. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. Lila's heart raced in her chest as she stood frozen, the heavy air around her pressing down with unbearable weight. The men who had brought her here were circling now, their eyes cold, calculating. George was still across the courtyard, his face drawn with fear, but his eyes filled with something else, something stronger than the fear he was showing. It was desperation, the kind of desperation Lila knew all too well. She had no idea what these people wanted, but she was starting to realize that she was caught in a nightmare that she couldn't escape. The mansion-like building in front of her, looming tall and dark, felt like a prison. There was no way out, not unless she figured out how to fight back. The man in charge, a tall figure with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. You should have stayed away, Lila, he said, his voice gruff but somehow amused. You've made things difficult for yourself, for George, and for everyone who gets in our way. Lila swallowed hard, keeping her voice steady. Who are you people? What do you want? The man smiled cruelly. We're the people who make sure things stay in order. You should have learned by now, no one messes with Harold Winters and gets away with it. Harold! Lila's voice cracked. You're working for him? This is all his doing. The man shrugged, as though it was obvious. He's the one who pulled the strings. We just make sure his orders are carried out. Lila's stomach twisted. She had been right, Harold was behind all of this. But why? Why go to such extremes to silence her? Before she could ask more questions, George suddenly spoke up, his voice hoarse. Don't listen to him, Lila. You have to get out of here. You can't trust any of them. Harold doesn't care about you. He never did. Lila's eyes flickered to George, but the man in charge immediately silenced him with a harsh glance. Shut up, old man, he growled, stepping forward to push George back. We're not here to listen to you. Lila's heart clenched, her protective instincts kicking in. She stepped forward, ready to defend George, but the men surrounding her only tightened their grip. She was trapped, completely exposed. What do you want with me? Lila asked again, her voice firm, trying to steady her breathing. What happens now? The man in charge tilted his head, as if thinking about it. You're going to stay here. You'll keep quiet. Harold wants you out of the way, but not dead. Not yet. He still has plans for you. Lila's mind spun. Out of the way? What did that mean? What kind of plans did Harold have for her? And how much longer could she endure this silence? Suddenly, a loud noise broke through the tension, a car engine roaring to life in the distance. The sound came closer, then stopped just outside the gate. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Who else was coming? The man in charge motioned to the others. Keep her here, he ordered, before walking toward the gate. Lila felt a surge of fear. Was this it? Was this her chance to escape? But before she could make a move, the man returned, followed by two others. They were dragging someone between them, someone Lila recognized instantly. Jessie! Lila screamed, her voice breaking as she saw her daughter, bruised and terrified, being pushed forward. Mom! Jessie cried, her voice hoarse. Mom, I'm so scared. What's happening? Lila's heart shattered at the sight of her daughter. She didn't know what to do. Every instinct in her told her to run, to grab Jessie and get out of there. But the men were too close, and the moment they heard her, they would retaliate. One of the men holding Jessie sneered. This is your daughter, huh? Harold said she might come in handy. Lila's mind raced. Harold wanted Jessie? Why? Leave her alone! Lila shouted, her eyes blazing with fury. You want me, then take me. Don't hurt my daughter. The man in charge chuckled darkly. You don't get to make the rules, Lila. You're here because Harold decided you could be useful. Now you're just a pawn, same as your daughter. All we have to do is keep you quiet long enough for Harold to use you. He'll figure out what to do with you soon. Lila's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't let them hurt Jessie. Not like this. Please, Jessie sobbed, her voice trembling. Mom, I don't understand. What did we do wrong? Lila took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Listen to me, Jessie. Everything's going to be okay. I'm not going to let them hurt you, I swear. The man in charge smirked. You should have thought about that before you decided to mess with us. Lila's mind raced, but she had no way out. The men had Jessie, and they weren't going to let her go without a fight. But there had to be a way. There had to be something she could do. Let me talk to Harold, Lila said suddenly, her voice cool and calculated. I'll do whatever he wants. Just let Jessie go. The man eyed her with suspicion. You think Harold's going to care about your empty promises? You've seen too much. And your daughter? She's a part of this now, too. Lila's thoughts raced as she tried to buy time. She needed to get Jessie out of here, but how? Every second that passed made the danger worse. The walls of the courtyard seemed to close in around them, the weight of their situation suffocating her. Just as she opened her mouth to try another plea, a loud crash sounded from the far side of the compound, followed by a series of shouts. Everyone turned toward the noise, startled by the sudden disruption. Lila's heart leaped in her chest. Was this her chance? She turned to Jessie, her voice urgent. Run. When I give the signal, you run. Don't look back. Just run. Jessie's wide eyes met hers, filled with confusion and fear. But Lila could see the spark of trust in her daughter's gaze. As the chaos continued, Lila's mind snapped into focus. She had to act fast. The men were distracted, But for how long? Chapter 9: The Arrest. Lila's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the figures step into the courtyard, their face obscured by shadows. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The men around her shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking from the newcomer to her, unsure of what would happen next. The figure moved forward, their steps measured and calm, yet there was an undeniable air of authority surrounding them. For a moment, Lila thought she might be seeing a savior. Maybe this person had the power to stop all of this, to save her and Jessie from whatever nightmare they were trapped in. But as the figure stepped closer, Lila's stomach twisted with dread. She didn't recognize them, and the cold, calculating look in their eyes told her that hope was a fleeting thing. "Who are you?" Lila demanded, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. She wouldn't show weakness. Not now, not when Jessie was so close. The figure stopped just a few feet away from her, their eyes never leaving hers. They were dressed in a dark suit, with a cold, emotionless expression that sent chills down Lila's spine. "My name doesn't matter," the figure said, their voice smooth but chilling. "What matters is that I'm here to clean up the mess you've caused." Lila's mind spun. "Clean up? You think I'm the problem here?" She spat, her anger rising. "You and Harold are the ones causing the mess. I'm just trying to stop you." The figure's lips curled into a slight, almost mocking smile. "You should have stayed out of it, Lila. You're not in control anymore. None of you are." Lila felt the weight of their words sink in. She had thought she could take down Harold, expose him for the criminal he was, but now she realized she had underestimated the depth of the web he had woven around her, and around everyone in Hillside Acres. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low but firm. The figure glanced over at the men who had been holding Jessie. They stepped back, sensing the power the newcomer exuded. The figure's gaze softened for a brief moment as they looked at Jessie, who was still standing there, trembling. "Take the girl inside," the figure ordered, their voice no longer calm, but sharp. The men quickly obeyed, dragging Jessie toward the mansion's entrance. Jessie tried to fight back, but she was too weak, too frightened. "Don't you dare touch her!" Lila shouted, taking a step forward. The figure raised a hand, silencing her. "She'll be fine." "I'm not here for her," they said, their eyes finally meeting Lila's. "I'm here for you." Lila froze. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had hoped for a way out, but now everything seemed hopeless. The figure stepped closer, their eyes filled with cold determination. "You've uncovered more than you should have, Lila. And for that you're a threat to Harold's plans. To all of us." "Harold's plans," Lila repeated, her mind racing. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a shiver down her spine. "What is he planning?" The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, they took a deep breath, as if considering how much to reveal. "It's too late for you to back out now. Harold's network is vast. You've become part of it, whether you like it or not." Lila's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" The figure's gaze hardened. "It's simple, really. You've been doing exactly what we wanted you to do. Digging around, poking into things you shouldn't have. And all the while, you were feeding us information." Lila's world tilted. "You what? I've been working for you this whole time?" Her voice cracked as the realization hit her. "You've been manipulating me?" "Harold, he knew everything." The figure nodded, their expression now one of indifference. "Harold knew you'd come looking. He knew you'd find the pieces of the puzzle. But what you didn't realize was that you were helping us put it all together. You were never really in control." Lila's knees weakened as the ground beneath her seemed to shift. She had been right about one thing: Harold was more dangerous than she had imagined. But now, it felt like she had been a puppet in a much larger scheme. "So, what happens now?" Lila whispered, her voice barely audible as she struggled to comprehend everything. The figure studied her for a moment, then spoke. "Now you're going to help us finish what you started. You're going to work for Harold, willingly or not. No, Lila said, shaking her head, her voice firm despite the growing fear inside her. I won't. I won't be part of this. You don't control me. The figure's eyes narrowed. You don't have a choice, Lila. Not anymore. Suddenly, the man who had been guarding George stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun at his side. It's time to move. Harold's orders. Lila's heart thudded in her chest. Her pulse quickened. This was it, this was where everything would change. She had fought so hard to stop Harold, to bring him to justice, but now she was trapped. And Jessie was in even more danger. What do you want from me? Lila repeated, desperation creeping into her voice. The figure tilted their head. We want you to cooperate. You'll do your part, and Harold will let you walk away. You'll be safe, and your daughter will be safe. Refuse, and we'll make sure you both disappear. Lila's mind raced. What was the right choice? What could she do now? Every part of her screamed to fight, to resist, but Harold had already made it clear. She was in his grasp, and there was no easy way out. Before she could make her decision, the front gate of the mansion opened again, and a group of armed men stepped through. Their faces were hidden behind masks, and they moved quickly, surrounding her, cutting off any chance of escape. Move, the figure commanded. Lila's pulse raced as she was ushered forward, her hands shaking. She glanced over her shoulder, but George was nowhere to be seen. Had they already taken him? What were they going to do with him? And what about Jessie? Everything she had feared was happening, and she didn't know how to stop it. Chapter 10. The Unexpected Ally. Lila's heart raced as she was pushed through the dark, narrow hallway of the mansion. The cold stone walls seemed to close in around her, and every footstep echoed ominously, making her feel more trapped with each passing second. The armed men surrounded her, their eyes cold and unreadable, their movements deliberate. She had hoped, no, prayed, that somehow things would turn out differently. But now she had no choice but to follow them, her mind spinning with questions. Where was Jessie? What had they done to her? And what was Harold planning? They reached a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway, and the man who had spoken to her earlier, the one who seemed to have control over everything, motioned for one of the others to open it. The door creaked loudly, and the sound sent a shiver down Lila's spine. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single hanging lamp. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift as the door slammed shut behind her. The air was thick with tension, and Lila could almost taste the fear rising in her chest. Sit, the man ordered, his voice like gravel. Lila didn't move. She stared at him, her eyes blazing with defiance, but her body trembled from the weight of what was happening. She couldn't sit. Not now. Not when everything was spiraling out of control. The man's eyes narrowed and he stepped forward. Do you think I'm asking? His voice grew colder. Sit down or I'll make you. Lila hesitated, but when he reached for her arm, she jerked away. The man stopped, his eyes hardening, but he said nothing more. Instead, he gestured to the chair across the room. Lila slowly walked over to the chair, her mind racing, trying to piece together what she could do next. She couldn't fight back, she was outnumbered, outgunned. But she wasn't going to just sit here and wait for whatever Harold had planned for her. She sat down reluctantly, her mind working overtime. Was there a way out of this? What was she missing? The man paced in front of her for a moment, his eyes never leaving her. Finally, he stopped and stared at her with an almost amused expression. You really thought you could bring Harold down, didn't you? Lila looked up at him, her eyes burning with fury. I still will, she said, her voice trembling but strong. I'll expose everything. I'll make sure the world knows what he's doing. The man chuckled darkly. You've been digging, Lila, but you've never understood the full picture. Harold's not the one you need to worry about. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. The people behind this, they're the ones who run everything. Harold is just a pawn in their game. Lila's stomach dropped. A pawn? Who were these people? If Harold wasn't the real power, then who was? Before she could ask more questions, the door opened again, and this time, a figure stepped inside, a figure that made Lila's heart skip a beat. It was Jessie. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she saw her daughter, her face pale and tear-streaked, but otherwise unharmed. She was standing there, her eyes wide with fear but filled with relief when she saw her mother. "Mom," Jessie whispered, her voice trembling. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to get us into this mess." Lila jumped to her feet, her heart racing with a mix of relief and anger. "Jessie, you're okay. Thank God." Jessie ran to her, and Lila pulled her into a tight hug. For a brief moment the world felt a little less heavy. But they couldn't stay here forever. Lila had no idea how much time they had before things escalated. The man who had been watching them smirked as he observed the reunion. "I'm glad you're happy to see each other," he said. "But don't think this changes anything." Lila turned to face him, her body rigid with tension. "What do you want from us? What are you planning?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the far side of the room and picked up a file from the table. He flipped it open, scanning the contents before looking back at Lila with a chilling smile. "We don't want anything from you," he said. "We just want to make sure you don't get in the way anymore." Lila's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. "You're working for someone else. Someone who's controlling everything." She stared at him, her eyes filled with fury. "Who are you working for?" The man paused, his eyes flashing with something Lila couldn't quite place. "I can't tell you that," he said, his voice hardening. "But I will tell you this, you've made things very complicated for yourself, and for everyone in this town." "Harold is nothing," Jessie blurted, her voice shaking with fear but growing stronger. "He's just a puppet, right? You don't control him, do you?" The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he spoke in a low, almost amused voice. "Smart girl. Yes, Harold is a puppet. But he's one we can control. And if you want to see him survive, you'll have to play by our rules." Lila's mind was spinning. What does that mean? What rules? The man stepped closer to them, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You'll cooperate or we'll make sure you both disappear. Just like everyone else who's ever tried to stand in our way." Lila stood tall, her anger flaring up again. "We won't let you do this," she said firmly. "You're not going to get away with it." The man's smile faded, replaced by something far colder. "You'll see. You don't have a choice. It's already too late." Suddenly, the door swung open again, and another figure entered the room. This time, it wasn't one of the men Lila had seen before. This was someone new, someone who exuded a sense of power that made even the man in charge hesitate. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know who this new person was, but their presence alone made her feel small. "Is everything ready?" the new figure asked, their voice calm, but the authority in it was undeniable. The man in charge nodded, his posture stiffening. "Yes, everything's in place." Lila's stomach twisted. What was happening now? Who was this person, and why did they look so in control? Chapter 11. The Unraveling. Lila's breath caught in her throat as the new figure stepped forward. The air around her seemed to thicken, her mind scrambling to catch up with everything that had just happened. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. This was about something far bigger. And as the figure's gaze met hers, Lila realized she had no idea what was truly going on in this place. The figure, a man in his mid-40s, exuded an eerie calm. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit that looked out of place in the dim, claustrophobic room. His eyes, dark and calculating, didn't give away a thing. Lila stood still, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. Jessie was beside her, her body stiff with fear. They had been through so much already, but this was different. Something told her that this person would be the one to push them into the final, dangerous part of their journey. "What do you want?" Lila's voice was steady, though she could feel the panic creeping into her chest. The man didn't respond immediately. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "I'm not here for small talk, Lila," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "I'm here to finish what you started." "Finish what I started?" Lila repeated, her heart pounding in her chest. "You've been controlling everything from the start. You're the ones who've been pulling the strings all along, aren't you?" The man's lips curved into a thin smile, but his eyes remained unwavering. "You think you understand? You think Harold is the real mastermind behind this?" He shook his head slightly, his voice now carrying a darker edge. "Harold is nothing. A puppet. Just like you've been." Lila felt her breath catch. "A puppet? Then who's pulling the strings?" she demanded, stepping forward, her voice rising despite the fear that twisted in her stomach. The man took another step closer, and this time, Lila didn't flinch. "You're looking for answers, Lila. But the truth is, you've already found most of it. The people behind this, behind Harold, they're much more powerful than you realize." "What are you talking about?" Lila asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She had been asking the same questions for so long, but now, the answers were slipping through her fingers like sand. The man's eyes darkened, his voice lowering. "The people who run Hillside Acres aren't just businessmen or local leaders. They've got connections everywhere. Political influence, corporate power, even international reach. They've been using the HOA as a cover for much more than you could ever imagine." Lila's mind raced. Political influence? International reach? This wasn't just about a corrupted neighborhood association. It was about something far more insidious. But who were these people? "I don't believe you," she said, her voice shaking despite herself. "This isn't just about land deals and money. This is about something bigger, isn't it?" The man tilted his head slightly, as though he were weighing her words. "You're finally catching up. But you still don't see the full picture. Harold was never meant to be the leader. He was meant to be a distraction, a figurehead." Lila's mind whirled. "A distraction?" "Yes. You've been chasing after him, following his every move, but he's nothing. He's there to keep people like you occupied while the real operations happen under the radar. It's all about power, and you've already dug deep enough to uncover the surface of it." Jessie, who had been standing silently by Lila's side, suddenly spoke up, her voice filled with disbelief. "So, you've been controlling us all this time? You've been pulling the strings, manipulating us?" The man glanced at Jessie, his expression unreadable. "You're smarter than you look. Yes, you were all pawns in a much larger game. But now you're too close to the truth. And that's why we can't let you leave here." Lila's pulse quickened as she processed his words. Too close to the truth. They had been trapped in this nightmare, following clues that led them here, not knowing who was really behind everything. "What do you want from us?" Lila demanded, her voice desperate. "What are you going to do?" The man smiled again, but this time it didn't feel like a victory. It was something colder. "You're not in a position to make demands. You've done your part, Lila. Now it's time to decide. Are you going to help us finish what we started? Or are you going to keep fighting, only to watch your daughter pay the price?" Lila's blood ran cold. Jessie flinched at the mention of her name, and Lila's mind spun. They were threatening her daughter now. "You want me to help you?" Lila said, her voice low with anger. "After everything you've done? After what you've dragged me into?" The man's gaze turned sharp, his smile fading into a cold stare. "You don't have a choice, Lila. You've already been part of this. You've been feeding us everything we needed just by asking questions, by digging. Now it's time to stop. We can make this easy for you. Or we can make it very difficult." Lila's hands clenched into fists. "I won't help you," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I won't be part of this anymore." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow colder. "You'll change your mind, Lila. Eventually, you'll see it our way. And when you do, you'll realize you're no different from anyone else who's ever crossed us." The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of his words. Lila's mind raced, every fiber of her being telling her to fight, to escape, to do whatever it took to protect Jesse and expose the truth. But it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Every step forward seemed to push her deeper into a trap. Just then, the door behind them creaked open, and a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Lila's heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. Chapter 12. The Final Betrayal. Lila's heart skipped a beat when she saw Harold standing in the doorway, his eyes locked on her with an unsettling calmness. The room was heavy with tension as the figure in front of her, who had been so cold, so confident, stepped aside, allowing Harold to enter. For a moment there was silence. The men who had been holding her didn't move, and the man in charge only gave a slight nod, as if this was all part of the plan. Lila's pulse quickened, and a wave of confusion and anger surged through her. Harold was here, but he didn't look like the man she had once believed in. He didn't look like the man who had been so focused on controlling the neighborhood with the HOA. This man, this stranger, felt more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "Harold!" Lila's voice was tight, her chest constricting with every breath she took. "What is this? What's really going on here?" Harold didn't respond immediately. He walked into the room, his gaze flickering briefly toward Jesse, who was still standing beside Lila, eyes wide with fear. The man in charge stepped back, allowing Harold to take center stage. Harold looked at Jesse for a long moment before turning back to Lila, his expression unreadable. "You've been asking the right questions, Lila," he finally said, his voice smooth, but there was something cold beneath it. "But you've been asking them in the wrong way." Lila's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? What do you want from me?" Harold's lips twisted into a small, cruel smile. "You've already given us everything we need. You've played your part in the game, Lila. Now, it's time for you to understand your place." "My place," Lila repeated, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've been lying to me this entire time. You've been manipulating me, us, from the start." Harold's eyes narrowed slightly. "Manipulating? No. I've been guiding you. You've been a useful tool in all of this, but now you're a liability." A cold shiver ran down Lila's spine. "A liability?" Her voice cracked. "I thought you cared. I thought you wanted to fix this. I thought." She trailed off, realizing how naive she had been. How foolish to think that Harold, the man she had trusted, was on her side. All this time, he had been playing her, using her as a pawn in a game she hadn't even realized she was part of. Harold walked closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been playing a long game, Lila. A game that's been in motion long before you came here. The HOA, the rules, the control, it's all part of something bigger. Something that can't be stopped now." Lila's breath hitched. "What is it? What are you talking about?" Harold's smile disappeared, and for the first time, he looked at her with something akin to pity. "You wouldn't understand, Lila. You never will. You were always just a means to an end." Lila's world felt like it was crashing down around her. Every word he spoke was like a knife twisting deeper into her chest. "You've been using me, us, this whole time?" Harold didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to the men who had been watching silently. "Make sure she stays put," he ordered, his voice cold. The men nodded, and one of them stepped forward to keep watch over Lila and Jesse. Lila felt a surge of desperation. "You don't have to do this. Please, let us go. You don't have to go down this path." Harold's eyes flickered with something dark, almost amused. "I've already made my choices, Lila. This is bigger than you. Bigger than me. There are powers at play here that you can't even begin to understand." Lila felt her hands tremble, but she couldn't let him see her fear. She couldn't show weakness. "I won't stop, Harold. I will find a way to expose everything you've done. You won't win." Harold shook his head slowly, as though he was dealing with a child. "You've already lost, Lila. It's over. Everything you've done, everything you've uncovered, it's all part of my plan." Lila's mind reeled. No. This can't be happening. This isn't real. You're not in control of everything. Oh. I'll fight back. Harold stepped closer, his voice lowering, now almost a whisper. You think you can fight back against people like me? Against the people I answer to? You're nothing, Lila. Just another pawn in a game you can't even see. And once you're out of the way, once Jessie is out of the way, everything will go back to normal. Lila's blood ran cold at the mention of Jessie. You'll never hurt her. Harold's smile returned, but it was cold and calculating. You don't get to decide that. Lila's mind raced, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had to think, had to find a way out of this. But with every passing second, it seemed like the walls were closing in faster. The mansion felt smaller, suffocating. The power Harold held over the entire community wasn't just real, it was all-encompassing. And she and Jessie were trapped in the center of it. Before Lila could think of a way to fight back, the door opened again, and another figure entered the room. This time, Lila didn't recognize the person. They were wearing a dark coat, their face hidden beneath a hood. The figure's presence in the room was almost unsettling. They moved with an unsettling grace, their eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Harold glanced over, his expression unreadable. Ah, you're here. The new figure nodded once, their gaze flicking to Lila. Is everything in place? Their voice was calm, almost detached. Harold nodded. Yes. She's already started to unravel things. We'll deal with her soon. Lila's stomach twisted with dread. She had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but it was clear that whatever was happening, it wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger, far bigger, and the more she tried to fight, the more she realized she might not be able to stop it. If you love watching my videos, so make sure to like and subscribe my channel.